The story surrounding Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and the film adaptation of Colleen Hoover's novel didn't begin with a lawsuit or a headline. It began, at least publicly, with a project that was framed as deeply intentional. Justin spoke openly about partnering with advocacy organizations to ensure the film handled its themes responsibly, saying he wanted a group of women who specialized in this space behind him from the start, so the story would reflect the lived reality of millions. The goal, he explained, was to tell the truth carefully and honestly. That was the spirit in which the film was presented to audiences: thoughtful, collaborative, and grounded in purpose. But as the film moved from production into promotion, a very different narrative took over online. Social media feeds began filling with accusations, claims of a coordinated smear campaign, claims that private messages proved wrongdoing, claims that reputations were being quietly dismantled behind the scenes. The central allegation was explosive: that Justin Baldoni and members of his team had orchestrated a deliberate effort to undermine Blake Lively through planted stories and bot activity. According to the version of events that circulated widely, there were text messages that proved it, there were internal communications that showed intent, and there was documentation that, once revealed, would make everything clear. The documents at the heart of that claim came from the phone of publicist Jennifer Abel, who had worked at JonesWorks. Her phone was taken shortly before she resigned, and later, data from that device was extracted using forensic tools. Abel has since alleged that the extraction violated her privacy and California anti-hacking laws, forming the basis of her lawsuit against Stephanie Jones. She claims she was promised her data would be transferred and the device reset, not scraped and copied. According to her filing, she never consented to a deep forensic search of private texts, personal emails, and cloud-based communications. The legal fight over how that data was obtained is ongoing, but what's undisputed is that a large volume of raw text data was ultimately accessed and shared. That trove included group chats involving Baldoni, members of his PR team, and others connected to the film. Select excerpts from those messages later appeared in media reports, presented as evidence that a coordinated effort had been discussed. But the full text strings, at least according to the broader cache described in filings, contained more than the excerpts that made headlines. In several exchanges, Baldoni explicitly asked whether bots were being used to defend him online and was told no. In one message, he wrote that he did not want automated accounts supporting him because it could fuel a negative narrative. His team responded clearly that they were not using bots. Those portions of the conversation did not receive the same amplification as the allegations themselves. At the same time, tension was building elsewhere. In mid-August, after months of limited communication, Colleen Hoover reached out to Baldoni in a message that expressed frustration and isolation. She wrote that it felt like she was on an island while backlash was being directed at her, and articles from both camps were fueling negativity. She referenced disagreements over the script process, a proposed documentary idea she had declined, and a dispute about donating a portion of proceeds from a coffee table book project that ultimately never materialized. She also mentioned a tattoo detail that had been changed in the film adaptation and said she felt misled about how that happened. Baldoni responded at length, denying that his team had contributed to negative press about her and reiterating that he had valued her collaboration from the beginning. He reminded her that she had read the script early in development and provided notes, addressed the documentary concept as an idea that was dropped once she objected, and explained that legal constraints prevented a donation being made in her name without proper structure. Regarding the tattoo, he acknowledged venting frustrations privately and admitted he should not have blamed anyone else for a design oversight. His tone, at least in that message, was conciliatory. Hoover replied the next day, clarifying that she had mistyped about reading the script, but reiterating that her issues stemmed from experiences and information she learned later. She said she loved the script and the movie and had spoken highly of the team publicly, yet she also wrote that she no longer saw a relationship in the future and did not think she could trust anyone from the process. She expressed concern about younger cast members navigating backlash and said she intended to step away for several months.
These exchanges complicate the simple story of villains and victims that dominated social media. They show hurt feelings, miscommunication, professional disagreements, and strained friendships. They also show that multiple parties were aware of media narratives forming in real time. Headlines were shared in group chats, strategies were debated. Some messages show Baldoni reacting to coverage he believed originated from Blake Lively's side, questioning whether he should respond or remain silent. In one instance, he commented that it seemed she wanted the internet to cancel him instead, reflecting his perception of how the online tide had turned. What makes this situation especially contentious is that Blake Lively allegedly had access to the complete data set from Abel's phone before filing her complaint. That means she would have seen not only the fragments that could be interpreted as hostile, but also the full context in which Baldoni asked whether bots were being used and was assured they were not. She would have seen the exchanges where his team encouraged restraint rather than retaliation. She would have seen the August messages between Hoover and Baldoni, including Hoover's admission that she loved the film and had praised it publicly. Yet she also wrote that she no longer saw a relationship in the future and did not think she could trust anyone from the process. She expressed concern about younger cast members navigating backlash and said she intended to step away for several months. These exchanges complicate the simple story of villains and victims that dominated social media. They show hurt feelings, miscommunication, professional disagreements, and strained friendships. They also show that multiple parties were aware of media narratives forming in real time. Headlines were shared in group chats, strategies were debated. Some messages show Baldoni reacting to coverage he believed originated from Blake Lively's side, questioning whether he should respond or remain silent. In one instance, he commented that it seemed she wanted the internet to cancel him instead, reflecting his perception of how the online tide had turned. What makes this situation especially contentious is that Blake Lively allegedly had access to the complete data set from Abel's phone before filing her complaint. That means she would have seen not only the fragments that could be interpreted as hostile, but also the full context in which Baldoni asked whether bots were being used and was assured they were not. She would have seen the exchanges where his team encouraged restraint rather than retaliation. She would have seen the August messages between Hoover and Baldoni, including Hoover's admission that she loved the film and had praised it publicly. Yet, despite that broader context, the legal complaint moved forward, citing a coordinated smear campaign. Supporters of Baldoni argue that this proves bad faith, that the evidence in full does not support the narrative presented. Supporters of Lively counter that context does not erase harm, and private tone does not negate public impact. The truth likely sits somewhere more complicated than either extreme. What is clear from the documents themselves is that the behind-the-scenes dynamics were messy and deeply personal. They were creative disagreements over edits and endings. There were bruised egos and misunderstandings about credit. There were questions about who controlled the narrative when the film shifted from production to press. And layered on top of that was the volatile speed of social media, where partial screenshots can define reputations before full records are ever reviewed. By the time the lawsuit was filed, the public had already formed opinions. For some, the existence of scraped text messages confirmed suspicion. For others, the full threads, showing denials of bot use and discussions about staying positive, undermined the smear campaign entirely. And hovering over everything was the unresolved legal dispute over whether those messages should have been obtained or shared at all. This conflict didn't begin as a courtroom battle. It began as a green partnership built around a best-selling novel and a stated commitment to telling a difficult story responsibly. How it evolved from that mission into allegations of hacking, PR warfare, and fractured friendships requires looking beyond viral clips and into the detailed record of who said what, when, and in what context.
By late summer, the fracture lines were no longer subtle. What had started as creative tension over edits and promotional strategy hardened into something far more personal. After Colleen Hoover's August messages and Justin Baldoni's lengthy response attempting to clarify his position, communication between key players effectively collapsed. Hoover made it clear she was stepping away, writing that she did not see a relationship in the future and felt unable to trust anyone involved in the process. That statement alone signaled how deeply the working dynamic had deteriorated. Behind the scenes, Baldoni vented to his team about what he saw as a sudden and coordinated distancing from him. In internal exchanges, he expressed confusion over why Hoover had not raised concerns directly with him earlier, and frustration that she had unfollowed him along with other cast members. He described feeling isolated during the promotional cycle, saying he was left to do press alone and was excluded from key events tied to the film's premiere. According to messages contained in the larger dataset, he believed the narrative forming online was not organic, but amplified by selective leaks and strategic media placements. He shared headlines, including pieces suggesting Blake Lively had no plans to address the feud publicly, and reacted to what he saw as damage control articles that reframed events in her favor. What stands out in those threads is not a blueprint for a coordinated attack, but a pattern of reaction. Baldoni repeatedly asked whether his team was engaging in questionable tactics, including the use of bots, and was explicitly told they were not. In one exchange, after noticing supportive comments from private accounts, he questioned whether they were artificially generated. His team confirmed they were not deploying automated defenders. He also floated the idea of releasing a video thanking fans and redirecting attention back to the film's themes rather than the controversy. The tone, while occasionally frustrated, reflected someone attempting to navigate reputational fallout rather than engineer it. Meanwhile, Hoover's position appeared conflicted. In her reply to Baldoni, she affirmed that she loved the script and the finished film and had spoken highly of the team publicly. Yet she also accused him of misrepresenting events in a way that would protect him if messages leaked. She referenced the tattoo dispute again, stating she felt deceived when he initially blamed Blake Lively for the altered design, before later acknowledging it had been his oversight. The disagreement was less about the tattoo itself and more about trust, about whether venting crossed a line into manipulation. At the center of the larger legal claim, however, was Blake Lively. Her complaint asserted that Baldoni and his associates had mounted a smear campaign against her, leaking grievances and attempting to sway public opinion. Critics of that filing argue that the full-text records undermine that allegation because they show him reacting defensively rather than offensively. They point to the August threads where he denied involvement in negative press and expressed a desire to avoid escalation. They also note that headlines unfavorable to him were shared internally as examples of what he believed was coming from the other side. Complicating matters further is the question of access. The material used to support the smear campaign narrative came from the scraped contents of Jennifer Abel. Abel contends that her employer unlawfully accessed and copied her private communications, forming the basis of her lawsuit under California's anti-hacking statutes. If a court determines the extraction was improper, it could impact the admissibility of the very evidence that fueled public perception. Legal observers often refer to such evidence as potentially tainted, meaning even if it contains relevant information, the method by which it was obtained could render it unusable. Still, public opinion rarely waits for evidentiary rulings. By the time these nuances surfaced, social media had already cemented a storyline, a powerful actress versus a director accused of retaliation. In that environment, partial screenshots traveled faster than full transcripts. Claims that bots were deployed or articles were planted became shorthand for guilt, even when the broader context showed denials of those very tactics. The complexity of creative disagreements over edits, script control, and promotional tone was flattened into a binary moral conflict. The Hoover messages add another layer. She acknowledged that both camps were fueling media narratives, an admission that suggests the public back and forth was not one-sided. She also expressed personal hurt over feeling excluded from certain decisions and over how disputes were handled privately. Yet in the same breath, she praised the final film and emphasized that she would always support it. That duality, loving the work while feeling betrayed by the process, captures the emotional contradiction at the heart of this conflict. For Baldoni, the fallout was professional and personal. Internal drafts of unsent messages show him describing heartbreak over friendships he believed had fractured beyond repair.
He characterized the situation not as a calculated campaign, but as a breakdown in communication that spiraled once it reached the press. Whether that characterization holds up legally remains to be seen, but it illustrates how dramatically perspectives diverged among the same group of collaborators. What began as disagreements over creative control and messaging evolved into allegations of hacking, fraud, and malicious intent. Each side now anchors its case in documentation. Lively in the excerpts she believes demonstrate hostility, Baldoni and Abel in the full threads they argue show restraint and unlawful intrusion. And hovering over it all is the unresolved question of narrative power. Who shaped the story first, and whether the first version to circulate will ultimately matter more than the complete record.
As the legal battle intensified, the fight over facts became inseparable from the fight over narrative control. By the time formal complaints were filed, each side had already positioned itself publicly. Blake Lively as a target of retaliation, Justin Baldoni as a filmmaker blindsided by a coordinated reputational attack. The courtroom filings did not introduce the conflict to the public. They attempted to formalize a story that had already been circulating for months. One of the most consequential elements remains the origin of the text messages themselves. Jennifer Abel's lawsuit against Stephanie Jones centers on whether her phone was accessed without proper authorization and whether its contents were copied and distributed in violation of California law. Abel maintains she was assured her data would be transferred and the device reset, not forensically scraped. If a judge ultimately determines the extraction violated anti-hacking statutes, it raises serious questions about whether the communications cited in the smear campaign allegations can be relied upon in court. Even beyond admissibility, it forces a broader reckoning with how private workplace communications become weapons in public disputes. Against that backdrop, the substance of the messages matters. The broader threads show Baldoni repeatedly denying involvement in planting negative stories and explicitly confirming with his team that bots were not being used on his behalf. They show him reacting to headlines he believed were strategically timed, including articles portraying Lively as refusing to address the feud publicly. In internal discussions, his team urged him to stay positive and avoid escalating rhetoric. While frustration and sarcasm appear in places, particularly when referencing media spin, the exchanges do not read like operational planning for a covert smear effort. They read like a crisis response unfolding in real time. That distinction is central to his defense. Baldoni's position, as reflected in the messages, is that he was responding to coverage he believed originated from Lively's camp, not initiating it. He expressed concern about optics, worried about how online commentary might spiral, and debated whether public clarification would help or hurt. In one exchange, he asked outright whether his team was engaging in questionable tactics and was assured they were not. For his supporters, those lines are definitive. For his critics, they are insufficient, arguing that intent can exist beyond what is written explicitly. Colleen Hoover's involvement complicates both sides. Her August 15 message acknowledged that both camps were contributing to media narratives, undermining the idea that only one side was shaping coverage. At the same time, her decision to distance herself from Baldoni and the production signaled a breakdown of trust that cannot be dismissed as mere misunderstanding. She wrote that she loved the script and the movie and had praised the team publicly, yet she also declared she no longer saw a personal relationship in the future. That emotional rupture became part of the broader story, reinforcing perceptions that something serious had happened behind the scenes, even if the details remained contested. For Blake Lively, filing the complaint formalized her claim that she had been targeted. Critics argue that because she allegedly had access to the full text archives, including denials of bot use and discussions about staying above the fray, she would have known the smear narrative was incomplete. Supporters counter that full threads do not negate the possibility of harm occurring in parallel channels, whether through tone, influence, or strategic silence. The disagreement ultimately hinges on interpretation. Do the messages exonerate, or do they simply fail to capture everything? There is also the broader cultural dimension. Hollywood operates in a space where reputation is currency.
Publicists monitor headlines hourly. Studio relationships hinge on perception as much as performance. In that ecosystem, even ambiguous language can be scrutinized for hidden meaning. A suggestion to let her dig her grave, as described in internal commentary about media coverage, can be read either as callous indifference or as a frustrated acknowledgement that overexposure might backfire. Context shapes conclusion. As proceedings continue, the stakes extend beyond individual careers. The outcome will influence how studios handle internal communications, how PR firms manage digital crises, and how courts weigh the legality of extracting workplace device data. It will also test whether the first viral narrative can withstand the slower, more methodical pace of legal examination. If evidence is deemed improperly obtained, it might shift the entire foundation of the dispute. If it is admitted and interpreted as proof of coordination, reputational consequences could be lasting. What remains undeniable is that a film intended to center on themes of resilience and breaking harmful cycles became the backdrop for an industry-wide spectacle about power, loyalty, and control of the story. The private messages reveal wounded egos, defensive reactions, and fractured friendships. They also reveal the speed at which selective information can define a public figure before a full record is considered. Whether the courts ultimately validate the smear campaign claim or dismantle it, the case has already demonstrated how fragile collaborative relationships can become once distrust enters the frame, and how difficult it is to reclaim the narrative once it slips beyond the people who lived it.